Is it time to say goodbye to your therapist? Here are 5 signs to consider. Welcome back, loves. I'm excited to share this topic with you today. It is one that is near and dear to my heart. I am your host, Marquita Myrick, and I've been a psychotherapist for 15 years, and I have heard a lot of stories, okay, about people's experiences in therapy. I hear these stories professionally and personally when people start to tell me that they have been in therapy or refusing to go back to therapy, all the things. And sometimes people over the years have even shared some of these things I'm going to share with you. And they've shared that it is a high concern for them and it is creating a barrier for them in therapy. And they plan to stay in the therapeutic relationship. And that is one of the hardest things for me to stomach. And I have no autonomy over people's lives as a psychotherapist. And so all I can do is offer my support, ask people some of those more challenging questions about whether or not they're getting their needs met, and even sometimes providing psychoeducation about how their needs could be met if they were to pursue a different therapist or overall a different therapeutic experience. So let's talk about it. Are you listening and you have been considering saying goodbye to your therapist? Let me know. I want to know. So the first one is differing worldviews. Now, this one can encompass a lot of things, but ultimately there's this fundamental disagreement that you might have with your therapist. And being one of the therapists who's been on TikTok for years, and no, I did not blow up some of the other TikTok therapists, over 5,000 followers. That's not too bad, right? So a lot of therapists started talking about political matters. And in our training, we were told to stay away from that, stay neutral when it comes to that. Don't share that part of your personal self. And now we see waves of therapists online saying, we need you to be able to ask this question. So there are therapists on both sides. There are therapists who say, that's my personal and private information. I do not want to share that with a potential or a current client. I don't want to share that in a consultation. I don't want to start sharing that with people I've been working with for years. They consider that they could lose business or whatever the case may be, people don't feel comfortable sharing it. I myself have had clients talk about their political concerns about, current events and things that are impacting them personally. And I have been honest with people about, where I fall on the political spectrum. Even in my personal life, though, I'm not a person who just goes around openly talking about politics all the time. It's just not my thing. And I tend to have those conversations in private with people I'm really close to. However, it has been important for my clients to know which way I swing when it comes to politics in particular. And you may be thinking, this is all about politics. It's not, I promise you. I am the therapist who stays neutral on these topics. So no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you're safe with me in this podcast. We're literally just having a talk about differing worldviews. So it could be politics. It could also be religions, different religions. I am Christian. I said that, initially in the first episode, and that shapes my worldview big time. And in grad school, I did immerse myself into other religions. I went to a Catholic church to study and experience Catholicism on their mass on a Sunday to understand what is this experience like for my future clients. This was when I was in grad school, and we were encouraged to read up on and educate ourselves on different cultures, different religions. That's what multicultural counseling is all about, really understanding that I'm not the only person in this world. There are other people who are going to end up on my therapy sofa and now my virtual therapy sofa, their own sofas, basically. I just get to see it. They're going to end up across from me. And I need to understand their perspective in life, basically. And so it doesn't just have to be politics. It can be religion. It could be child rearing. I've talked to people online who ask me for a recommendation for a psychotherapist. And I've had a mother say, look, I have experience with raising a child who's on the autism spectrum. And it's really important to me, to that mother in particular, to have a therapist who not only specializes in that on a professional point, however, she wanted the therapist to have experience. A therapist who has experience raising a child with autism. So, and I did find several referrals for that mother, but this just goes to show you there can be differing opinions, differing worldviews on a lot of different topics. And in particular with the autism spectrum, there is a lot of talk about ABA versus other treatment modalities, right? So you might have a therapist who has a child who is on the spectrum and they say all the right things online, but then you get into a therapy session with them and you find out that they have used a method or modality for their own children that you refuse to use for your children as an intervention. And that could create a clash, right? Again, we're just using examples here. I'm not saying I'm for or against certain treatment modalities. I'm not saying I'm for or against a certain side politically. I'm not even saying I'm against anything that's not Christianity. I believe people have the right to choose what religion works for them. And, some people don't practice religion, and that is their right. That is your choice if you're listening and you're one of those people. What I'm really trying to say is that these differing worldviews can come into the therapy room, whether or not we would like to recognize it. And it can create a barrier to therapeutic progress. So there is a thing called countertransference, and that's when we, as the therapist, have an emotional response to something the client is sharing. And I will include myself in this. I believe I do a really good job of managing that countertransference when it does arise, and it does, even 15 years into being a therapist. However, some people don't. And so maybe you're sharing something about your religion or your views on a particular topic, and you notice that your therapist's body language changes. You notice that the way they're talking to you has started to change. You can see it in their face. I really pay attention to body language and the way people's tone of voice changes when they're talking to me. Maybe they tense up and their shoulders get higher. If you're really paying attention, you'll pick up on some of these things. And you shouldn't have to pay that much attention as the therapy client. You should be able to experience your therapy in a relaxed, safe environment and not have to be on edge and not have to be on guard that you may cause your therapist to feel something that's uncomfortable, because it is in fact about you. So when it comes to differing worldviews, it can create a barrier to the therapeutic relationship and a person reaching their treatment goals. And sometimes it doesn't. I think it's important to say that too. It doesn't always create a barrier. Just as in your personal life, you can have a relationship with someone who has a differing view or opinion on something, and it not negatively impact that relationship. However, in therapy, people come and bare their souls. They tell it all. And that's what we want you to do, right? We want you to open up so that we can help you. And when that happens, there can be that thing called countertransference that comes up and make it very uncomfortable for the client. And sometimes the client can pick up on this and sometimes not. And when you're not picking up on it, sometimes you just tend to feel that something is off. So if this is happening for you in the therapeutic room, that relationship, I want you to take note of what's coming up for you mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I want to encourage you to talk to your therapist about it if you feel safe doing so. However, we're talking about whether or not it's time to say goodbye. So I think it's okay for you to acknowledge that something's coming up, explore it with your therapist if you feel safe. And it's also okay if you have to say goodbye to that therapist because there's that worldview difference is just not lending to your positive progress in therapy. I know not everyone wants to hear that. That's just the reality of it. All right, let's move on to number 2, the personality clash. Now, I myself am ambiverted. I used to be more extroverted, and then having children, that will change you. They take so much energy, right? And so you get to this place where, you find yourself in the middle sometimes when you have children, which is the case for me. I have 2 young children. And so my personality has shifted throughout the years. However, in therapy sessions, I'm pretty energetic. I'm very interactive. I present more as an extrovert. And then when I have more introverted people across from me, I do something that is called mirroring. I kind of mirror their behavior in a way and their presentation, because I'm not going to be hype in a therapy session if my client is more calm. But there are moments where we're laughing together and there's an energy exchange and we're just there. So that personality clash can be challenging though. Have you ever met someone and you said they have a strong personality or they have a weak personality or they're somewhere in between? This does not align with personality traits in the traditional sense of introvert, extrovert, ambivert. That's not what I'm going for here. I'm more so saying sometimes people's personalities rub you the wrong way. Hopefully, in your therapeutic relationship, your therapist's personality is rubbing you the right way. However, if it's not, it's important to acknowledge what's coming up for you. Are you feeling judged? Is it the way that your therapist is asking you questions? Is it that they use a lot of hand movements? If you're watching this video version of the podcast, you're seeing me use my hands a lot. Does that bother you? Does that feel offensive to some people based on the topic? So there are a lot of things that make up our personalities. And in the therapeutic space, I have found if there is a personality mismatch, it's going to show up. It's going to show in the type of therapeutic modality your therapist chooses, of course, and it's going to show up in how they talk to you, how they interact and engage in the session. And if that feels off, then honey, you have every right as the client to say, you know what, I need to consider other therapists. I need to maybe find someone whose personality doesn't evoke such strong emotions from me or doesn't make me want to shut down and not talk because I am here to talk about the things that are bothering me so that I can get the help I deserve. So that's number two, personality clash. And then number three, mismatched modality. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about. Not everyone's approach to therapy is going to meet your needs. And certainly not everyone's approach to therapy is going to match your learning style. I have historically had clients who tell me, do not give me homework, Marquita. If you give me therapeutic homework, I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to do it. Okay. You will not be getting worksheets via email. Okay. And then I've had people who say, I'm being very strategic about therapy. I don't want to spend money on therapy for more than 3 months. I want a structured approach to my healing, to the exploration of my problem. And I want to get results and I want to get them as fast as possible. If you have worksheets to give them. If you have journal prompts, give them to me. Everyone is different. However, when we really talk about a mismatch modality, I'm talking about like I'm an integrative type of therapist. So I pull on psychodynamic therapy where we look at your childhood, we look at the unconscious motivation for the things that you're experiencing right now in adulthood. So we don't just stay in the present here and day and move forward as a more solution focused therapy approach. We go backwards, right? And we don't have to stay there long. And I always get the client's consent to go backwards. I've always found it to be helpful. Even if we don't find anything, well, at least we know that stone is not unturned, right? There may be a therapist who uses advanced treatment modalities for trauma, such as accelerated resolution therapy, EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And maybe they use brain spotting as well. Maybe those modalities don't work for you. Maybe you don't want to use an eye movement therapy, such as ART, which is short for accelerated resolution therapy. Maybe you want more traditional talk therapy to address your trauma. And if that's you, that's okay. That's just the style you need, right? That's your learning style. You don't want to move your eyes, you want to talk. I think of my time working with young children. And, when I first started working with young children, people would say, well, you got to only do play therapy with children because that's the modality that works best with children because the language of children is play. That's what I was taught. And I have worked with 8 to 11-year-olds who did not want to do any kind of playing. They did not want me to pull out a puzzle board or Uno cards. They didn't want to play in the sand. They wanted to just talk. So I think we put ourselves in this corner as psychotherapists when we say, well, this modality works for all adults or all children or all people. And so that's the beauty, though, in there being a variety of modalities that we can use to treat different diagnoses as psychotherapists. And so if your therapist is using cognitive behavioral therapy, for instance, to manage the negative cognitions that are coming up for you and give you strategies to address them. However, you have a history of not liking cognitive behavioral therapy. Well, it's important to know that in the consultation. A lot of therapists are on online directories and we check off these boxes that say these are the modalities we use. Maybe that person checked off cognitive behavioral therapy and that's not their primary source, their primary modality that they use to support their clients. These are questions you can ask in the consultation to get a better understanding of how they execute that specific modality's um, treatment types. So yeah, it's important to ask those questions. And it's also helpful if you know what you're looking for and you know what works for you and what doesn't. A mismatch modality could slow your growth. It could challenge your ability to meet your treatment goals. And sometimes people don't recognize this until it's too late. Now, a good therapist will be paying attention to whether or not you are meeting your treatment goals that you collaboratively set at the beginning of the therapeutic relationship. And sometimes people get comfortable. I'm just going to be honest with you. Sometimes people get comfortable. I have come across psychotherapists who say they don't keep notes as we are supposed to. They don't, create or update treatment plans. And so then there's really not much guiding that therapeutic relationship other than what you're bringing in each specific session. And maybe that style works for you, maybe it doesn't. However, if there is a mismatch modality, some of the signs would be that you aren't making progress. You are feeling highly uncomfortable when your therapist tries to utilize that modality. You may not know the term. With like EMDR, you would know the term typically, and you would say, oh, I don't like that, or I don't want to do that. Some people don't say it though. Some people still go through with the therapy session and they don't say, I don't like that modality. They just do it because that's the therapist's chosen modality. I am here to tell you, you do not have to do something that you do not want to do in therapy. People say if it's not broke, don't fix it. When it is broke, when it is broken, fix it. Even if it's not broken per se, and it's more so, it's just uncomfortable, and you're thinking, well, this isn't harming me overall. Like, I'm not leaving this therapy session crying because I did this therapeutic modality that my therapist really likes and I don't like. Well, it's still not working though. There's still some discomfort. There may be some mild discomfort with some modalities. That's part of the healing and growth process, right? We're uncovering stuff that maybe you've held in for years. However, the goal is to do no harm. We have an ethical commitment as therapists to do no harm. So if harm is being done, even if you're leaving and you're thinking, I did not like that. However, I'm going to keep doing it because this is what my therapist says works, or this is the modality they like to use, then it's causing harm. It's causing harm, love. So we have to address it. So that's mismatched modality. All right, the next one, number 4, are ethical concerns. This is a huge reason people might want to consider leaving their therapeutic relationship. Ethical concerns are unprofessional, they can be inappropriate, and ultimately they can be very harmful. I'll just speak of the ones I hear of the most. By the way, I do personally think it can be unethical if a therapist is utilizing a modality that the client has said, this has been harmful to me in the past, and the therapist insists, well, you won't have that experience with me. This is what I do. You won't have that experience with me. So let's just move forward. That's unethical. Now we're asserting, that therapist in that situation is asserting their beliefs onto the client. And sometimes, because of the power difference in the therapeutic relationship, people don't feel comfortable saying, I don't want to do that. Like, you don't get it. I've been harmed by that. So that can be unethical. Another thing that can be harmful is the building of a friendship alongside the therapeutic relationship. I've heard this a lot. I don't like that I've heard this a lot. It's highly unethical. And a lot of states have it written in their law that that we cannot become friends with our clients. And there's typically a certain amount of years put to that. I believe the ethical codes, the American Counseling Association says that you have to wait 2 years before you were to engage in a friendship with your former client. Those codes are there for a reason. The ethics are there for a reason. Here's my understanding of it from people who've shared that this has happened to them. The therapeutic relationship starts off very well. The person is making strides, like you're healing, you're moving and grooving. You may even need therapy less over time because it's just so effective and your needs are being met. And then we mentioned countertransference earlier, where there's some unconscious things that are coming up for the therapist as they're hearing your story. Well, now that you're in a good place, right? You're starting to share things that are coming up for you, and the therapist is set off in a way. They're having some countertransference. So then that therapist might start to over disclose how they've experienced that particular thing, or maybe it's currently going on in their lives and they're sharing their business with you. And now all of a sudden, you're showing up to therapy. Your therapy session is now all about your therapist, and you're starting to use words like, I love that person. We're really good friends. And your therapist might be using that language with you too. And then you're paying at the end of the therapy session. Only, what was the exchange? What did you get? Because I don't know about you. However, when I hang out with my friends, I mean, and sometimes we treat each other right, but there's there's no there's no understanding that we're meeting up and I'm just going to listen to you and I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you to listen to you. That's what I'm going to do. No, we don't do that. And therapy is all about you being prioritized, your needs being met, you being the center of attention. That is what the therapeutic relationship is all about. Unless you are in a group therapy setting, it should be all about you. Okay. So this is very unprofessional. It's harmful because what if you call it out to your therapist and say, I feel like this is more of a friendship and it's no longer therapeutic in the way it used to be, and the therapist denies it? Well, that's harmful. What do you mean? You've been telling me your whole life story. I hear all of your business about you and your partner, what you're going through with your kids, your recent medical diagnosis. I know everything about you. However, in the past 3 months, you've learned nothing new about me because you've made it all about you. So That's an ethical concern that could pop up. That the other one is that modality that you feel is being forced upon you, even though you don't want to participate. That is also unethical. There are a variety of other ways that therapy can be unethical. Maybe we'll do a separate episode on that. However, I'm just really giving you an overview and hopefully giving you some things to think about. Now, last but not least, lack of progress. Love, are you making progress in therapy? Are you getting better? Let me say that more clearly. Are you getting any better? Are your symptoms easing up? Are people in your life giving you positive feedback about the changes you've made as you've been in therapy, even if they don't know you're in therapy? Because when I was 19 and I first started going to therapy, my mother started saying, "You sound so much lighter. You sound happy again. You sound like my old Keita," right? Well, because I had been calling her crying a lot before that. So once she started to hear this difference, she didn't know I was in therapy. I then told her I've been in therapy. So maybe people are giving you positive feedback. And if they aren't, whether or not they know you're in therapy, maybe you're just not making progress. Now, with this topic, I have to acknowledge that sometimes the therapist is doing all the things to help you get there and you're not making progress. Sometimes it just wasn't the right timing for you. Maybe you were not in a position to actually do the work. Therapy is work, mentally, emotionally, and it can be a physical strain too when you think about the manifestation of stress. So sometimes people have gone so far into one direction where they're depressed and anxious and they're traumatized over and over that becomes the norm. The body is just used to that. So when we try to get you towards the other direction to get some ease of your symptoms, well, that can be a pull and that can feel uncomfortable for some people. So sometimes people aren't ready to do the work. However, if you are in therapy, your therapist is putting in work, okay, love, and you are putting in the work, you're journaling, you're even exercising for your mental and physical health, you're following up with your psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner, you're taking your medication as prescribed, and you're doing the things, but there's a lack of progress. Well, something's up there. We have to explore that in the therapeutic space. And so I'll give you some ways to know whether or not it's you or it's your therapist. I really think I gave you a good idea of if it's you. If you really feel like you don't have the capacity to practice the skills, then that could be why you're not making progress, right? Sometimes the therapist will say, which I've had to say to clients, look, I feel like you want to do the work. We talk about these things, but it almost seems like I'm overwhelming you when I'm sharing some of the strategies. Am I giving you too many strategies at once? Sometimes it's you're not giving them enough. Sometimes it's you're giving too many. There is this balance we have to arrive at as psychotherapists because not everyone can handle 3 to 5 new strategies every session. So, but if you're feeling stuck, it could go back to number 3, which was mismatched modality, where the modality isn't quite resonating with you and your needs, right? And so again, if your therapist is having you interact in certain ways in therapy with certain treatment methods and modalities and it doesn't feel right, well that could stunt your growth and your progress because you have this underlying resistance to it. And you know you don't like it. And you're just not saying it. So hopefully I'm empowering you to say the thing or to ask some questions and to say, are there any other modalities or methods that we could use to arrive at a similar outcome? I do want this anxiety down. I do want this depression gone. Are there any other things that, any other tools you have in your tool belt that we could explore that could help me arrive at my healing, my growth, that could help me meet my treatment goals? These are questions you can ask. And sometimes the therapist just is not putting in the work. Maybe that therapist has gotten comfortable with you and it's feeling very relaxed and they're not really bringing any modalities. And you feel like you're showing up to therapy and you're just talking and the therapist isn't giving anything, isn't challenging anything, isn't highlighting anything. That doesn't work for me in therapy. Okay. So if you're experiencing that in your therapeutic relationship, it could be time to consider saying goodbye. And it doesn't always have to be a goodbye. There have been people who have taken feedback, gone back to their therapist and brought up the things that weren't working. And then the therapist says, I'm so glad that you felt comfortable and safe enough to bring these concerns up to me because now we can address them. Yes, I do practice other modalities. Yes, I do pull from other interventions. In fact, I'm in a current training. We could start doing some IFS, which is internal family systems. We could see if that works. With certain clients, I've said, okay, these strategies aren't working. Are you open to motivational interviewing? Let me tell you a little bit about it. And then I'll come back in the next session and we'll try that. The point is, you're either going to have a therapist who's going to work with you on it to see if there's a shift that could happen in the style to meet your needs, or the therapist that says, well, this is just my style. So I appreciate you bringing this to me. And yeah, I need to refer you out, you know? And I did give you a little attitude there because I have heard the stories of the therapist who gives the client attitude when they bring up concerns. So if you have that and the therapist cannot maintain their composure, it is time to say goodbye, love. However, if you have the therapist who says, I hear you, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like you need a different therapeutic style than the one I can offer. Let me look into my database. Let me, go through my connections and see who offers that specific style, because that might resonate better with you and your goals for treatment. That is the response you deserve. Okay. You deserve the therapist who says either I'm going to shift my style for you. I have been leaning on this therapeutic modality. However, I know about these others. Can we explore those? Are you open to that? And then you get very integrative in those upcoming sessions to figure out which one of those styles you like best. And or the therapist who says, you know what? Ethically, I have to let you know that I am not trained or skilled in that therapeutic modality. However, I know who is. Or I'm going to see if I can find someone who is for you, or feel free to find someone who can better meet your needs with a different therapeutic modality. That's what you deserve. We are humans, so we do get our attitudes, okay? However, we should not be getting attitudes with you as the client. It is your therapy experience. It is your safe space. At least it should be. Therapy is for you to collect all the healing that you deserve. And trust me, you deserve it. I don't care whomever has told you you don't, or you just need to get over your issues, or it's your problem now. Maybe you have parents saying, well, that was your childhood. You deal with it. Whatever the case may be, I don't care what ethnicity you are. I don't care what side you vote on politically. I really don't care where you're from. What I care about is that you seek the healing that you deserve and that you are able to access and achieve it. So, this is another episode on the Anxiety and Free podcast. Today, we talked about, is it time to say goodbye to your therapist? 5 things to consider. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I have thoroughly enjoyed sharing these 5 things with you to consider. And I hope you'll tune in, and I hope you will share this episode with others. Have an amazing day. The Anxiety and Free podcast is sponsored by Find My Therapist, connecting you with therapists at findmytherapist.us. If you found today's episode helpful, please share it with someone who might need it. Tune in next week for more conversations on navigating mental health and finding your freedom.